I'm happy to have this back.
Well, we mentioned it on the annual plan.
Yeah. So that does but just saying to Councillor Lee that you'll send us
I can send you through the public consultation. It's all public.
Thanks, members. So we'll reconvene the meeting of the Planning Committee. It's 3:42. Members will go to item 10. Proposed plan change rural activities.
Have we got another one?
And Barry Mosley,
which is quite
and
different from
Peter Barry.
Unitary.
Welcome.
Yeah.
And just wait for Deputy Mayor here.
Oh, he's just gone to the loo.
Okay, I think the...
He wants to move it, does he?
no, sorry. I'll just ask for the staff to begin with. So we'll take the report as read, members.
We are paying for half of those.
Is there anything else to add, Peter or Barry?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. As you say, this relates to a proposed plan change to the rural activities part of the Unitary plan. We have a very brief 4-slide PowerPoint presentation we can take you through, and then you will see on your screen, when you look at the resolution, there are some proposed amendments to that resolution, and I can explain those once we've finished the PowerPoint presentation, if that's what you desire.
I might just put that motion up. Councillor Sayers, you comfortable moving the...
Yes, thank you.
Move, Councillor Sayers. Councillor Cashmore?
Yeah.
Thank you. Moved and seconded.
I've got some questions, Mr.
Yep,
Chair.
we'll go back
Are you ready?
to presentation.
Yes, so we'll take you briefly through this presentation, and Barry can explain the provisions that we're talking about.
Yes, afternoon, councillors. There's only 3 slides, so that's just the title, so flick on from that one.
You've got the clicker.
Oh, I'm doing it, am I? Okay. Okay, I think we're away. Yeah, this slide just basically tries to capture very succinctly the reasons for this plan change. The fundamental issue is to try and appropriately manage activities which are currently not provided for in the activity table for the rural zones in our Unitary plan. Currently, activities not provided for have got a discretionary activity status. And that's at odds a little bit with the policy at the RPS level, which is to protect elite soils, prime soils, to try and maintain rural character, amenity, landscape and biodiversity values. And the idea that urbanisation as a general rule, we're going to try and contain within an urban boundary, whether that be Auckland City or coastal, rural coastal towns and villages. Okay, so what's happening out in the rural zones at the moment is there is a lot of pressure for development, in particular dwellings and minor household units. And it's considered that activities not provided in rural zones could be more appropriately managed if those activities we didn't anticipate actually popping up in these areas when we did the plan were treated as a non-complying activity. And we made an adjustment to some of the policies that currently sit in the plan and removed the reference from residential buildings to dwellings. And there's a reason for that in the next slide. We've had some recent decisions out of the Environment Court, and in one particular one, the judge approved a intensive retirement village in a rural zone, and did so on the basis that there was a definition in the Unitary plan that said residential activities, and that wasn't just dwellings, that was a whole lot of different things which one could put in a residential sort of bucket, but it wasn't envisaged that we would get intensive residential facilities emerging in the likes of the countryside living zone. In another recent decision for our hearings commissioners, this time we saw the granting of industrial activity in the rural zone. And the reason that was given or heavily relied upon in terms of that decision was that it was a discretionary activity, and for that reason one could assume that the Office of the Plan had not discounted industrial activities as being a reasonable sort of occurrence in rural zones. One of the key drivers behind our rural zones is to try and protect, as most of you are probably aware, elite soils in particular and prime soils, and that zone that's some rural production, that's to keep horticulture, rural production activities going, things that generate crops, and particularly north of Pukekohe, you know, there's areas there where you can look at elite soils, areas of elite soils where certain crops are being grown, which represent, say, 23 to 24% of the national output for that particular crop. So we, as a council, as a community, have tried to sort of afford a reasonable amount of protection to our rural zones for rural activities, and we've provided a lot of other land in other locations for residential activities, industrial and such like. So that's the PowerPoint presentation, Mr. Chairman, and I think probably those two cases are a good example of why we're here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Peter?
Mr. Chair, I could just elaborate on, for example, the Environment Court decision related to a retirement type village outside the corner of near Taupaki and Taupaki Road near Kumeu, and we're talking about a 289 room 5-storey retirement village occurring in our countryside living zone, where we always envisaged basically a countryside living house on a site of 1 to 2 hectares, and all of a sudden we're getting a as I say, a 5-storey 289 unit development in there. So clearly there is something that is amiss in the way that the plan is being interpreted, and so we're trying to clear up what our intention was for zones like that.
Absolutely, and I think Councillor Sayers is quite familiar with that one, and the problems that has delivered us. So, look, I just need to go to the motion, and sorry to Councillor Sayers, I asked if you wanted to move it, but there is a slight amendment. There's some information that's come in from the Independent Māori Statutory Board, I think it was, and they had a late contribution. They're concerned about this change as it's currently drafted, making it more difficult to establish papa kāinga. So if you could, sorry to drop that on you, Councillor Sayers, but if you just want to check whether you're comfortable with what's in the red.
I'm very comfortable with that, and I appreciate the Independent Māori Statutory Board raising the matter. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Cashmore, I'll let you just consider it, and we'll take questions. Councillor Walker, then the Deputy Mayor, and then Councillor Cooper.
Yeah. So is it appropriate for me to make some comments at the same time, just to
Moved and
speed
seconded,
some
yes.
things up? Okay. So I certainly don't have any issue with what we're doing at all here. It's actually quite refreshing that we're visiting parts of the plan where there are gaps. Having said that, there are 2 or 3 things that I'd just bring to your attention. One goes to the description of elite soils, and I know that in the submission process, certainly as it goes to the Pukekohe growers and the like, it's not just the soil, it's the combination of the soil and the frost-free nature of some of these locations that actually makes them even more unique. We've got ample evidence to support that. It does concern me that we purely refer to areas around elite soils, where in fact there are a combination of things. So I just put the question as to when we're going to deal with that. I'd suggest there is an opportunity to deal with that now in respect of this change. I would suggest that there's evidence to support it that we received during the submission process, and we know that. So I just want to raise that one issue now.
Okay. So if I can just paraphrase that, is that a question, is there opportunity to expand the scope of this plan change to focus even more on the protection of elite and prime soils?
Well, the the point that I'm making is that it's more than just the soil. It's actually locational. The thing that's particularly unique about Pukekohe is you've got great soil, but then you've got a frost-free nature that enables you to have a potato crop coming in earlier. It makes it significantly more value. So it's not a substitute, but it's an addition, and it's recognising that you've got locational aspects. A similar thing also applies to the other area that's identified, where I think there's some warehousing the like that's going to be going up on our elite soils, and also relatively frost-free area up in Omaha Flats.
Okay, Peter?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, we've intentionally kept this plan change really in tight in scope. We know there are a few other little fixes that we could make to the plan, but we really want to keep it tight so we actually get this through with a minimum of fuss. The wider we make the scope, the more opportunity there is for appeals and things to delay. Second thing, of course, is that the government is interested in it, and we're thinking there is going to be a national policy statement of relation to prime and elite soils, and so that work is sort of ongoing now. So we will have to deal with that in the fullness of time, and it would be better to do that with that sort of national policy guidance under our belt. So we don't really want to stray into that just at this point in time.
So you're confirming that at a central government level, officials are working something up in that area?
That's what we understand at the moment, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, I'll just say that that doesn't allay my concerns. I mean, my concerns are around making things tight, not loose, which is the reason we get into these fixes, because we leave things loose. The other matter that I don't see mentioned anywhere is the issue around climate change, as it goes to the unsustainable nature of these developments that are often in the rural areas because of their distance from services and the like. At some point, I would suggest we need to bring those arguments to bear, because they are increasingly powerful. So I just ask the question, why we're not doing that?
I think the answer is that what we're doing here is we're changing the status for many of those things that are not anticipated from discretionary to non-complying activities, and we will be able to, through that assessment, consider a whole range of issues, including how they climate change, whether it's sustainable, and so on. So all those things, this plan change will allow that to happen, that sort of assessment.
And I understand that. My comment is I don't see it mentioned anywhere in any of the words in the plan change. And given it's our nuclear moment, that's widely appreciated. It's the most significant issue facing the planet. I would have thought it was the sort of thing that we would be picking up on and referencing, because it is referenced elsewhere in our Unitary plan.
Okay.
So I have a question around that that remains on the table.
Okay, look, I think we just need to, I think it has been answered, and then you sort of asked it again. So I think we just need to take it as having been answered. And as Peter and Barry said, this is a very focused plan change in responding to a critical issue that's surfaced in the rural areas. And we have to narrow it down to get this over the line as soon as possible.
There's one other question I had.
Can I have one more? Because I'm
just
not
one
sure
more.
whether it's questions or comments. You asked for comments, but the questions interspersed. So.
Well, in the main, they're questions. Having said that, they're loaded questions. The other question I've got is just around clean full landfills. Obviously, they're something that are a significant issue in the rural area. A number of the effects that you mentioned that are under consideration here would apply to them, but clean full landfills aren't mentioned. So I just ask why.
Yeah,
why not?
Not mentioned in this report, Mr. Chairman, but clearly my reading of the activity table, there is some reference to clean fills. So if you look at the table there for rural activities, I think you'll probably find a row that references clean fills and tells you what the status of those activities is. But as has been pointed out, very narrow plan change, trying to deal with one specific area. certain activities not anticipated in rural zones getting through the process and without the robust sort of policy analysis that one would perhaps like. And that's really what we're trying to do here today.
Good, thank you. Councillor Cashmore.
Well, thank you, Mr Chair. Peter Parry, thanks very much. Completely get the fact this has got to be quite narrow and tight. Get the fact that we need to remove the reverse sensitivity out of the rural production zones. Are you challenging the judge's opinion on allowing the retirement village 5 stories high in a countryside living zone?
Well, my understanding, the proposal was eventually modified quite considerably, but yeah, but certainly in terms of a decision, whether that's the sort of outcome we're looking for in the countryside living zone, I think we would challenge that because it's clearly a little bit at odds with how we saw the sort of activities emerging, particularly an intensive sort of multi-storey retirement facility, which no doubt had quite a high level of care for its customers. I mean, there may be proposals like modified, cut down, and, you know, with sort of looking at the certain effects and really customising certain things, you might get away with some form of a retirement village if it went through the consent process. But the sort of intensity that we were seeing with that proposal and that decision was obviously alarming.
So, Mr Chairman, the issue really is reverse sensitivity, and whether it's elite soils or not, the rural production are very, very vulnerable to reverse sensitivity from past decisions made by legacy councils. We have situations where on Pukekohe Hill, land has been purchased and the owner is wanting to do groundworks, and we know full well they want to put a school there, and it's right next door to some of the primest, best soils in the area. And the climate and the soils tend to go hand in hand in there. But the most important thing of all is the ability to actually produce things, whether it's in a glass house or on the soils or those land-based activities. And this, what you're recommending here, does tighten that down. I hear what Councillor Walker's saying. I presume those are going to be pieces of further work because there are many things, including the clean fill landfill issues, that need to be sorted and tightened up a bit in future pieces of work for plan changes, I would think, and some variances there, to make things more certain and more secure, because it is a growing, really fast and rapidly growing problem we have out there in the rural land. But I completely support what's here, Mr Chairman. I think it's focused, it's targeted, and retirement villages and rural zones and that sort of activity is just not appropriate, would not work.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Cooper.
2 questions. One is, I suppose this doesn't stand up if you have a minister that wants to get outside the rural-urban boundary. We're doing this in our current authority, but if someone wanted to come along and change it that was above us, could they? Like, because we're saying nothing outside the RUB and all that, but if the minister came along and said, right, that's it, we're doing it, we haven't got any control? Or does this make our case stronger if we do this?
Yeah. No, I think if it's zoned rural land, this stands. For the minister to change it, you have to issue a national environmental standard and say that certain activities had a status that were different to what was afforded in our plan. Okay. And he's sort of unlikely to do that. Where things are going with the rural zones, or rural land in particular, it seems to be that this current central government seems to want to look more closely at the issue of soil and protecting rural land for rural production.
They wouldn't do it here. Okay, so the other question is just, I'm fine with Papakāinga, but it's all about bulk and location for me, because that's the issue with the retirement village, right? That's what we don't like. And a Papakāinga could just build something just as big. So is there some way we can say, yes, fine, but it's still got to, you know, have an acceptable bulk kind of, you know? Because, I mean, it's all very well saying we're doing this to stop this. The environment doesn't care who's living in it. And so about the scale is what I'm concerned about. And we're not going to be building little power sites. We could be building quite big Papakāinga, who knows? You know?
So just to probably respond to that, I mean, the change to the resolution subject to a further consideration of whether Papakāinga should remain a discretionary activity. And so part of that conversation that we want to have could be about how we was going to be about how we might do that. So there's several options. One is to keep it in the activity table with it as a discretionary activity, and you might put some additional policies around that to try and
About bulk and stuff like that.
yes, and you might look at some of the other policies. That would take quite that's a big way to do it. Another way would be simply to have some keep it as non-complying, but have some policies that recognise that if it was for a papakainga type process, there might be some more weight given to it in your assessment as a non-complying activity.
Got it.
So we're not saying
Easy to get over the line, but it's just keeping those kind of rules about size and numbers of people.
yeah. So we're just saying let's have that conversation with the
Okay.
IMSB and the members listed there, and there are several ways that we might do it. So let's have that conversation and arrive at something that can address your concerns.
Sorry, can I just ask through Mr. Chair, so when you said keep it as non-complying, but we're saying remain discretionary, so
Well,
what is it?
so the consideration is to whether it should remain a discretionary activity. If you say actually consideration should be that it shouldn't remain a discretionary activity, it would automatically be non-complying,
Right, got it.
because that's what we're doing for the generality of activities not provided for normally listed in the activity table. We're saying those automatically are non-complying, and we're just going to consider how we deal with papakainga.
Okay, thanks. I'm looking at it from the,
Thank you.
not the way you are.
Yeah,
I
sorry.
get it now, thanks.
Yeah.
Councillor Sayers, would you like to close this debate?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the input of the other councillors. It's been very valuable input, so I thank them for that. A few questions. First question, just picking up on Councillor Cooper's questions there, Peter and Barry. I've made the assumption in putting in those changes that, and I think you've given me peace of mind here that you can actually deliver on that resolution without too much difficulty. And I take it, Mr. Chair, you probably had that discussion prior to putting it up. So, just want to check that.
Yes, yeah. I mean, it could be as simple as having another. What it would mean is another activity added to the activity table, for example, and there would have to be some mention in the Section 32 report justifying that, or it could be the alternative of putting another policy in, and so as well, or a combination thereof. So we could keep it. We want to keep it tight and not make major changes. Though.
Okay, I didn't want to do something that was too difficult. Another question is, quite often I hear the jargon Class 1, Class 2 soils. Is that still current? And I assume that relates to prime and elite and prime soil. Is that still relative jargon that's appropriate to be using? I just want to check that. I'm in a few committees and I hear that. Or is the terms now prime and elite soils?
Yeah, there's Class 1 is generally elite. Class 1, 2 and 3 sort of fall into versatile soils, being sort of highly productive. There's not much difference economically between Class 1 and 2. But yeah, there is a variation in language, but
Yeah.
you are right.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Two more questions. Obviously, this went to court and a judge has kind of made a ruling. We need to just tighten things up. Going back to the communities and explaining how we got to this position, what's the answer of how, why did the judge pick up on this? How did this get discovered? Why wasn't the ordinance tight at the start? What type of answer can we give to that, please?
Well, I think the judge relied on a definition, which residential activities, which sat in a nesting table, which encapsulated a whole lot of other activities. So it wasn't just dwellings; it was a number of other things. So it may have been that it wasn't anticipated that such a wide view would be taken of the term residential activities as appeared in the policies. But the judge sort of went back to the basic definitions and said, well, it doesn't just include dwellings, does it? It includes all these other things, and therefore granted the proposal. So it may be that it wasn't anticipated that the outcome would be as it was. I mean, you could look at it now and say, well, I sort of think that's obvious reading the definition, but it might not have been obvious that that actually would have occurred. So I think it's a journey. It's something that's happened, and it's beyond what we anticipated. And it's come about because of a definition that's opened the door to that.
Okay, thank you. And just the final question, which you might have an answer for, is just the consultation. I see that we went to the local boards, both Franklin and Rodney, a couple of times to get their feedback on it. Do you know if those local boards, either of those local boards, engaged wider than the actual local board themselves? Like, did they go to any interest groups and get feedback from them? Do you happen to know that, or did it just go to the local boards and they?
Yeah, no, we're not aware of how they dealt with it internally. We simply asked them, and they responded and said we have no comment, and we, you know, as set out in here. So we don't know their internal process.
Right, thank you. So can I just pick up on your comment there, Pete? I had the impression that both local boards endorsed the changes in the
Yes.
they did. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Look, I'll put it to the vote. I just want to acknowledge there has been advocacy on Councillor Sayers' part, representing the or listening to the Kumu Huapai Residents and Ratepayers Association that have raised this matter with both Councillor Sayers and myself. And I know these issues have come to the attention of Councillor Bill Cashmore as well in the south. So we'll put this to the vote. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried. Thank you. Members, I'd like to go to 13, and apologies to other staff.